In other videos that I've done, I've gone into quite some depth about my favorite plugins and how to use them. I've done maybe a dozen videos on reverbs alone, and including a whole video just on the history of reverb and what types of reverbs there are in the universe. So I'm not going to go too much into detail right here about reverbs, because you can easily look at those and find them. And what I am going to do is show you real quickly some of my go-to reverbs that I use on drums exclusively, and show you that right here. What I like to do is imagine having the drums in a bigger room than the one that I'm in. As you can see, I'm in a pretty small project studio. I don't have a big drum booth. I have a small drum booth, and so I can't get those huge big drum sounds if I want that on a big rock and roll recording or something orchestral. What I can do is use plugins to simulate those larger rooms that I don't have available to me. And I've got a couple of them that I keep parked on my DAW as part of my template. And let me slide over here to my reverb section, which I keep over on my left. And you can see all my different reverbs down here. I've got my Seventh Heaven, my H-verb, my R-verb, my Abbey Road plates, my stereo chamber, my Abbey Road chamber, and then my black hole and my IR verb, which I've discussed in a previous video. But the ones that I like to use on my drums are going to be stereo room emulations, basically. It has to be a stereo room so that I can send a stereo send to it. Now, back on my drum section here, I've got at the bottom, I've got this stereo room setup. All these sends up at the top here are mono sends, but down at the bottom I reserve that little guy just for drums. I usually just put one stereo reverb on the drum kit. I think that's probably enough. You're looking for a bigger room. What I'll do is pre-assign that stereo send down to one fader down here, one return, and that will typically be my stereo chamber. So I go up here, select the one that I have here. That's going to pop up my two favorite rooms. One of them's bypassed and one of them's not. The one that's not bypassed is one of my all-time favorite, and that's going to be my Abbey Road plate reverb. And it's got great sounds for drums. It's a stereo plate reverb, and you can put that just on your snare, or you could put a little bit on your tom-toms as well, or maybe even a little bit on your kick to give that kick a little bit of a room sound to it. Very adjustable. You've got 4 different plates you can select here. Plenty of presets you can play with. The list is a mile long. I start with drum overhead. I just find that one is really nice. It pre-selects plate C. It even puts a little bit of EQ on it, a little bit of a dampener on the plate. It's a great place to start and experiment from there as just an overall drum room sound. If you want something a little bit more organic and acoustic sounding, a plate might not be the way to go, as good as they sound, but you could bypass that by option clicking it and option click the second one that I have, which is the Ocean Way Studios from Universal Audio. And I've had a whole video just on this one as well. This is basically 2 of the big rooms from Ocean Way Studios in California. And they've gone in and sampled or modeled those 2 rooms, the Studio A and the Studio B, which are really big open orchestral rooms back from the 50s. Very well designed sounding rooms from Bill Putnam. And you can now park your drum kit or your singer or your orchestra in either of those studios and get the benefits of that. There's Studio B, where you can pop it over to Studio A, which is even bigger. Big, woody sounding, not really heavily reverberant, just very natural studio sounding rooms that sound great on drums. The nicest thing about it is that you can adjust 3 different pairs of microphones in those rooms, and how far back they are from the microphone. You can have 1, 2, or 3 different pairs of microphones or any combination, and you can adjust the distance of those microphones from that source, in this case a drum kit. Or you can pop it over into the Studio B as well and do the same thing there. They've got the drums configured differently in a corner. Anyway, that's a really nice place for me to get a big, nice sounding studio in the confines of my little home recording studio here. So I'm basically booking a session to record my drums at Ocean Way Studios right here in Hawaii without having to travel to sunny Los Angeles. I won't go too much more into this plugin. Suffice it to say that that's between those two, between the Abbey Road plates and the Ocean Way Studios, I've got 2 really great sounding stereo rooms for my drum kit. Going back over to the drum kit, the stereo send is a little different than the mono sends. The stereo send, say on my snare drum here, for example, it looks the same as the mono sends, but you've got a second knob here, right there. And that knob is the panning or the balance. So that snare drum, for example, is right up to center. So when I'm sending, using this knob, when I'm sending the snare sound to the reverb, whichever one I chose there, it's going to determine with this knob where in that reverb, where in that room the snare sits, basically. So the snare probably should be dead up to center. But on the tom-toms, if I wanted to put a little reverb on my tom-toms, I simply unmute and adjust the level. And then using the panning knobs, I can adjust the tom-toms sort of like I do the balance knobs or the panning knobs on the faders themselves. So I might want the first tom-tom to be a little bit off to the left, the second one a little bit off to the right, the third one I might want to have it a little further over to the right. So in addition to the tom-toms panning across when the drummer plays a fill from left to right or vice versa, the reverb is going to follow that. The reverbs are going to be kind of in accordance with that stereo image. So not all the reverbs are coming right up to center. They're coming from different sides of the room. So it's a nice way to kind of play with that drum space a little bit too. It's great on percussion as well. If you wanted to put a tambourine in your on the far left hand or right hand side of your mix, you could also put the reverb from that tambourine on the same side, or you might want to put it on the opposite side. So the tambourine sound is on this side, but the reverb is ringing out from over here. It's a really fun way to do it, and you can only do it with a stereo reverb. And the only way to adjust that panning is with a stereo reverb send. So something I've set up here in my template. You could set up multiple stereo reverbs if you wanted to and use that on other things like vocals or whatever. But I usually just have mono to stereo sends on my on most of my instruments. Then I'll use a stereo send and a stereo reverb on my drum kit.